is a rather long video today, but it has to be long because I'm going to be painting. And what I did with this little painting, the first thing I did was put an underpainting under the drawing. Now I'm going to do something also that I almost never do. I never do this. I'm going to actually copy a picture. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm trying to give people permission in order for them to learn to paint, to copy other paintings. Now, I'm not sure where this little picture is from. I tried to look up the image on the internet and I couldn't find it. But it's early 18th century. It's just coming out of the Rococo period. And I bought it at an antique store. So it's a paper print. And I'm going to make a close copy, not an exact copy, of this young man posing with a book. And he has some ribbon around him. And I'm going to not make it exactly the same, but I'm going to have it pretty much the same. Let's put it that way. Now I'm painting the background in over the overpainting. And the overpainting is something that I frequently do where I block in the colors with a wash. And I'm using oil paint here. After I put the drawing in, that is, I block in the colors. And then I begin with the background. That's just how I do it. I start with the background and then I work forward. And I'm using a mixture medium that I make myself, which is half Damar varnish and half linseed oil. And this takes actually 6 months to prepare because you have to let it dry out in the open until it gets to a certain thickness. And then I use that as my painting medium. A lot of people use turpentine or they just use Damar varnish and several other mixtures with the turpentine like linseed oil and other kinds of varnish, sometimes walnut oil. But I just use these two, and they work really well for me. But again, like I said, it takes 6 months to prepare it, so I have to prepare quite a bit of it in advance when I'm painting. And what I'm doing here is I'm sculpting. I prefer to think of it as a kind of sculpture. I'm sculpting the face with paint. I'm putting in the darker details first and working up toward the lighter details. Now, when I was teaching, and I taught for quite a number of years, studio art classes, I used to encourage my students to copy master works. And this is something that's been done for centuries. It's a good idea to copy some of the masters, and as you begin to copy them and you learn some techniques, you actually improve. Your knowledge of anatomy and structures improves and that sort of thing. And I don't encourage people to copy paintings and then, claim they're theirs. I certainly don't do that. But using some of the old masters is a good idea to train yourself. And these days, if you go to most universities, you're not going to get an education on actually how to paint. It just hasn't been done in years and years and years. There are specialty schools, though, that do teach painting still, and the old style, which is how I paint, basically. So I'm copying this, and there's no copyright on this image. Copyrights expire after so many years, so you don't have to worry about getting in trouble. Where you get in trouble is if you claim it's your idea. Now, this is going to be my painting. I'm going to make changes, but I'm using it just to show you how you can do this. And this is going to be for my log home, a rather striking and fancy painting for a colonial log home. But, people did have things like this. They came from the old world and often would bring the things that they inherited with them. So that's my story for this. Now, this young man is holding some kind of a booklet. He's probably holding that because he's young and he's probably, maybe he's at Oxford learning, and he's proud of that, or his parents, and they wanted a picture of him, a painting. I don't know how large the original painting was. It certainly would be larger than a miniature. It doesn't have the look of a miniature. Miniaturists had a specific way that they did things. And this was probably taken in the 1920s and printed and put in this little oval frame that you see beneath my hand. I don't look at this painting a good deal. I'm just getting references off of it as I work around. And he has a kind of satin frock coat on, and the little book that he's holding is slim and leather bound, which tells me it might have been some kind of a test book, or it was a book that he was given to write something, some kind of a report or story or history of something, perhaps for his studies. And I continually work around, oils stay dry for quite a long time, days and days. Depending on the medium you use, they can stay wet for weeks even. So there is a time that is required for doing layered paintings like this to allow that oil paint to dry in between sessions. And I do that, but you don't see it here because I'm making a continuous video. The brushes I'm using are Kolinsky Sable, and they're quite small. And I use them for blending and also for detail work. So I'm not using bristle brushes for this, which I typically do use when I do larger oil paintings. I don't use black. I make my own very dark colors that almost look black. I'll take a color called sap green and a color called alizarin crimson and mix those together, and you get such a dark brown if you're using good oil paint that it actually looks black. Black paint, if not used very judiciously, can make your painting muddy or inky looking. And a lot of people who aren't experienced at painting get very discouraged because they wonder why the colors don't look bright. And that's because they mix black into everything to darken colors, and that in the inexperienced hand can be something that affects your painting quite a bit. So my advice would be to mix dark colors. You could even use a purple and alizarin crimson together, a deep violet, concentrated paints, and or mix burnt umber with it, and so on. Now I'm going to put in the dark portions of his lace cravat, and we'll pick out the details much later. So I'm just going around where the shadows are, where the folds of the cravat are, and I'm putting dark paint underneath the frock coat. And again, I'm not using black. I have taken some other of the darker blue colors and put those in on that ribbon that comes along the edge. The Rococo painters and the history of that followed through into the 18th and 19th century, where they would stage their paintings. He has this blue ribbon, and then he has his little book holding there. He even has a little flower in his hair, which I didn't include. And there would be symbolic meaning behind those for the family or for him as an individual. But what those are, I don't have a clue, other than the book he's holding, and he's very young. So I'm thinking he's a student of some sort. And the other thing is anatomy. Learning anatomy is very important if you want to do anything like a portraiture oil. Learning how to position the eyes, the mouth, the ears, where they actually go on the face. And you can see he's starting to look like a person now instead of just a flat character. And that's what I mean by sculpting with oils. But again, I'm sticking with the darker colors still. I mix my paint as I go along. I lay out my palette in a way that's very familiar to me, so I know exactly where the paint is and what I need to use. Everyone has their own way of doing that. And as you paint, you learn what's easiest for you. I tend to group the colors together, the cool colors, which are blues and violets and greens, in one spot, and then the warm colors that are yellows and ochres and oranges and reds and browns in another area of the palette that I'm painting from. I tend to use zinc white rather than titanium white. Titanium is more opaque, and I try to stick with the colors that are more translucent. And now I'm just going in around his nose and his eyebrows and his eyes. I'm using a very fine brush here. And typically I would use a magnifying device to do something like this, but I can't film and do that at the same time. So with my old eyes, and I do have cataracts that are not operable yet, it is a little strained for me, but I'm able to do it. The other thing that I would do differently on this is a piece of canvas that I cut out and glued on a piece of wood. And then I gessoed it and sanded it in between the gessoing, but it was still not fine enough. So the next painting I do, I'm going to just do it right on the wood and sand it. And I'm going to use a gesso that's made of chalk and rabbit skin glue, and not the acrylic. The acrylic does tend to absorb a lot of the oils, and I found that I had to, and I almost never use acrylic gesso for oil painting. I found that I had to go back and redo things because it would just soak up the oil. And now I'm doing his hair. I don't believe this young man has a wig on. It looks like its natural hair has been powdered. And when they did their hair, starting in the late 16th century and on, wigs actually started to fall out of fashion. They were still used in the military, and they were used in the judicial system and for very formal gatherings at times. But people would take a formula rather than washing their hair with combs, and they would put a formula of suet, lard, sometimes beeswax together and other oils, and comb that through their hair and style their hair with that. And then they would apply the powder. And they would put a robe on. And some people who were wealthier actually had a whole room that they used as a powder room. That's where that came from, powder room. Sound familiar? And they would go into that room covered up, their clothes would be covered, and their hair would be powdered in that room. And oftentimes the powder they used was basically just flour, fine white flour. There were some who later on used talc, which was not very safe, actually, it turns out. But wheat flour was the preferred powder. It would be scented and sometimes dyed. They would put pinks and blues in it to have colored hair. So that's not a new idea either. I'm going in with a little bit of lighter colors to bring out the eyes and the cheekbones, and blending it into the darker colors that are on the side of the face. Now, flesh tones, you can buy flesh tones in the tube. I don't recommend that. I recommend learning to mix flesh tones, because when you're doing flesh tones, if you look at real life, a person's face is made up of more than pinks and browns and ochres. There's going to be blues that show up from the clothing that they wear. If you're wearing something blue, there'll be a reflected blue light, or red, or green, or purple, whatever color that person has on. And also there's veins that are blue. And if you are a man and you've shaven your face, there's going to be a slightly blue cast to where you've shaved. And all of that is to be taken into consideration. Plus what kind of light is used. Most of these older paintings would be done in studios where there was a lot of light, natural light, and typically it would be north-facing light, which was the most even. And men also have a more ochre-colored skin, and women tend to have a more pink-colored skin if you are a white person. But even among darker skins, there is a difference between the color of the skin of the darker peoples. And you have to take that into consideration as well and get a good look. There'll be darker reds, there'll be browns that are rich in red or rich in yellow or ochres, and some may even have tints of blue. And science has told us that there's actually only one racial color. All people are basically one color. It's the melanin in your skin that determines the hue. But it's all the same process. This individual tends to look like he has very pale skin, but you see those really red cheeks in the original. That was probably makeup. Men wore makeup just like women did. Sometimes they would wear patches on their skin for beauty marks. The younger people probably wouldn't do that, but they would put rouge on, and sometimes lipstick even, what we call lipstick today, coloring on the lips. And the men did it just as much as the women. It was part of their dress. It wasn't until the Revolutionary War in France that those things fell out of favor, and men's clothing became more severe looking. They didn't want to be classified as aristos and be sacrificed to the revolution. So clothing became quite simple. And even the women, the large sack dresses and all of the ornamentation began to be reduced in France. And those fashions always came to England as quickly as they came up in France. And then we got the Regency period where the dresses were much more simple. The men's dress was, black coats and white stockings and black pantaloons. And the lace was toned down a bit. Now I'm going around the eyes and the lids because those areas will be darker. And you see I put some very dark paint up into the hair area, and that will get also covered with a lighter color, bringing it up light as I go. Now I've been painting, let me see how many years. I started painting when I was 8 years old in oils. My mother bought me an oil paint kit, and I've never stopped. And I'm going to be 71 in several weeks from now, let's put it that way. So I'm approaching my 71st birthday, and all those years I've been painting in oils. And other types of paint as well. And I'm going in just doing the pupils and trying to get the reflection in the eyes so that the eyes will look alive. And this is going to take a little bit of work. Yes, I do use my hand to get rid of paint. I use my clothes, my hands, sometimes the surface it's underneath. Get a little bit too much paint in the brush, and then you have to take it off so it doesn't glop too much. And just putting the eyelids in. Again, I'm not using any black. I tend to use a lot of brushes as well. I will use 20, 30 brushes at a time for a painting. I'm actually using more brushes than you see laying down right there. I'll be picking them out of my brush holder as I go when I need them. And putting in his lips, and again, his slightly hooded eyes. If you know where to put the paint and the right colors to use, you can see now that he's getting a face. And again, light helps you to sculpt the face. So things that are light, look closer. Things that are dark, look further away. Cool colors also look further away than light colors or warm colors. So if you keep that in mind, you can begin to sculpt your painting. Whatever it is, whether you paint flowers or landscapes or whatever it is, even if you're doing abstract painting. And under the chin, of course, where his cravat meets his face and neck, it's going to be a little darker. Now this is speeded up, of course. This took many hours to paint. And I did let it dry in between coats. But you can't see that because I've edited it in such a way that it looks like I'm just sitting there painting right to the finish, but that's not what really happens. I'm just putting a little dot of white on the lip where it shines, and I'll go over that again too, because this is just the first layer. I'm still at the first layer. I'm mixing paint at this point because I need to put the hair in. I gave him a little bit more hair than he did in the actual picture. I just liked it better. And hair can be tricky. It's, not just drawing lines to get hair. There's reflections and there's nuanced paint and shades that have to be dealt with. I'm just going into the background again here, and then this face, if I have the same color that's going to be somewhere else, I'll tend to go around the whole picture and add it. I had too much paint on the brush there, you can see. When you look at shadows too, this is another thing. Shadows are not just black and white or light colors. Shadows have colors in them. A lot of the color you'll see shades of purple and blue and green, and sometimes darker browns or cooler browns. So if you can not think of shadows as just black paint that you have to put down, you'll get a more realistic or believable image by you observing the colors that actually are there and then putting them in. We only see color because of light. It's the reflected light that we're looking at. And he has a satin coat on. So I'll work that until I get something that looks like satin. And there's quite a few different colors that are appearing in the original. So I'm going to go around and fill that in. He has some kind of a gold brocade waistcoat on, so that will take some time also to bring that out. So this was probably a very wealthy young man. But as I say, I have no information about this picture, who did it, when it was exactly when it was done. But I'm just going by the style. It looks like it's late Baroque period, just from the hair and the clothing. Could be later, but I'm not absolutely sure. There's the book he's holding, which makes me think that he's a student of some sort. And I have to work on his hands, which are completely in the shade, with the exception of one finger and a little bit of the palm of his hand. So that will take some work too. Again, if you're interested in that medium that I'm using and you want to try oils, it's one that I make myself and I've used for years, and it is half linseed oil, which is the kind of linseed oil you use for oil painting. It's not linseed oil that you buy at the hardware store. And it's pure Damar varnish. And it's equal portions. And then I let it dry for up to 9 months out in the open air. And it does form a little skin on it. And then you take the skin off and you have your medium, and then you can cover it after that. And it will stay for forever, darn near. The shape and the type of brushes that I'm using too are important. I use, as I said, Kolinsky Sable. And I'm not using bristle brushes. I'll use a fan brush later on. These are detail brushes, these smaller ones. And I used a flat Kolinsky Sable brush that you saw earlier, small one. I'm not using any filbert-shaped ones at this point. The hair, there's a fan brush, and that's pretty useful for hair and backgrounds. And this is quite a small one. They even have smaller ones, but this is the size I'm going to use for this. Just smooth some of this out, and then I'll go back in and put more details later. And as I said, you see this sort of gray color, but I actually didn't use any black in this at all. And now I'm putting in some blues for the shadows, mixed with some greens, like sap green, ultramarine blue. And I'm using, again, as I said before, these are translucent colors. They're not opaque. That does take some time to learn how to use translucent colors. Learning mixing is pretty important. Now it's getting there, but the details still aren't there. But I'm just giving you a close look at it. The eye has to be adjusted on our right side. It's a little too big, so I have to go in there and correct that. But I will get there eventually. We'll just put some light colors in the cravat area to begin with. For the lace, that will take some time too, because we'll have to let this dry at some point. Otherwise, you start mixing the paint right in, and that's not always a good idea. For some things it is, but not for this. Now, I've stopped looking at the painting. I put it somewhere. I'm working off of memory to a good extent. And I'm going to try to get that satin started. But it will also take some work because it'll have to dry in between. The next painting I'm going to demonstrate will be a landscape for the log home. I'm only going to do 2 paintings, I think, for this log home that are paintings that I've done. I don't want the occupants of that property to look like they have too much money. Just putting some darker colors in the background. Give it a little more shape. And I'm using burnt umber for that. There's raw umber and there's burnt umber. There's raw sienna and there's burnt sienna. And those colors are pretty different. The burnt ones have more of an orange tint to them, more red. And the raw ones are flatter. They're darker. There's more of a charcoal kind of tint to them. I'm having a little glare problem with the light, trying to get it in, but then I have to see what I'm doing too, so it is a little challenging to get the light just right. And I'm not painting under natural light either, which is something that is a challenge for me because natural light is much better to paint by. Painting by artificial lighting can be a problem unless you can compensate for it somehow. And that's what I've been trying to do with this. Getting his hair in. I don't use straight white, very rarely, unless it's for a very shiny spot. It's more of a white with a little bit of brown mixed into it to give it, it's pretty light, but it's not, it's not just straight white. Going around for his puffy curls. I brought the picture back for the hair. I was not looking at the picture for quite some time. But when I went to completely finish the hair, I decided I needed to see where it was going. So the light is coming from the left, so his face on the right is partially in shade. And I'm putting his tie in for his cue in the back, which you can't really see in the picture, but it's there. It's just, for some reason, doesn't show up well on the camera. And I'm just taking that same blue and using it in the shadowed areas. Under his mouth, under his eyes, side of his face, under his chin, and even around the back of the cravat on his waistcoat or his frock coat. I haven't really done much with the ribbon yet in the front, or the piece of fabric that seems to be surrounding him. And this picture, of course, is a bit smaller, so I condensed it up. I squashed him a little. I did it deliberately, but still I'm keeping the proper perspective for a human. I'm just putting a little bit more black background in with burnt umber. And just blending it in. And a little bit of rose red on the cheek area because he's wearing rouge. And as I said before, the men wore rouge and lipstick, powder and patches on their face. It was part of their dress. And that's why I say this is probably late Rococo. As time went on, that fell off of favor with the men. I made the book a little smaller too. I was concentrating more on getting his face in rather than just having a head on top of a pair of clothing. Not a pair of clothing, on a suit of clothes. You'll go into a museum and you'll see some of these paintings where some of the women in their very elaborate gowns that are painted, it almost looks like a head is just stuck on because the dress is the focal point. But it was a display of wealth too. It was a lot of things. It was a display of wealth, but it was also a way of recording the person at certain stages in their life, since there was no photography at this point. Okay, we're getting there. There's still a long way to go. So far I've been mainly focusing on his face and his hair, but we will get to the other portions as we go along. Human faces aren't perfect either, but they do have some symmetry to them. So if an eye is 2 inches higher than the other, it's not going to look right. If the ears are too low or too high, you'll notice it right away. And I continue to work the background around the individual, trying to get the lighting so that it's just right. Now later on in this video I actually make a frame for this, and the frame will be styled in the same period. And I'm going to show you how I did the frame as well. I'm just dry brushing it here and there, cleaning the brush in between strokes. Now I'm going to start putting the lace in. First pass on it. But that will have to dry, and I'll have to go back in and do more shading as well. And when I do that, after this is dry, I make washes of darker color to put in here and there to give it that more sculpted look. But we're not to that point yet. When I was teaching, especially drawing classes, because a lot of the people that I had were planning on being painters, and they would take drawing as one of their first courses. And I would have the students come in, and I would give them a mirror, and I would have them draw a self-portrait in the very beginning of class. And then I would tell them, at the end of this course, you're going to draw that same portrait again of yourself to see how you've improved. And 99% of the time, there was huge improvement just from using certain principles in drawing. And I did this in painting as well. And they would just be amazed that they could come so far. Some people's art skills were so poor in the beginning that they would get discouraged and say, I shouldn't even be here. And I would take them through some exercises to learn how to paint and draw. And by the end, there'd be such improvement that they couldn't believe that they could actually produce something as good as they did. And that was always very satisfying. I kind of miss that about teaching, as you can well imagine. And another thing I used to tell them, look, part of the success of this whole thing is to just show up. If you just show up, about 60% of the problems will be solved just by showing up. So, again, the satin is going to take a little work to get it to look like satin. I'm just bringing some of the lighter colors in there. Points of light where the satin is picking up the light. It's a kind of grosgrain satin, so it's not just, it has some texture to it. And I'm going to continue to work on the eyes. Eyes are pretty important. As I said, if I had a magnifying glass, it would go a little bit faster and easier, but I wouldn't be able to film it then, so. Now I'm working on the ribbon, that piece of fabric that's kind of wound around his arm and behind his book. Not quite sure why that's there, but they must have had their reasons. I thought about leaving it out and just continuing his frock coat down, but it does add some color, so it was a design choice based on some reason. Maybe that blue ribbon has something to do with success for his graduating or something or going on. I don't know. Unfortunately, iconography and painting can be kind of tricky. Sometimes it's just a ribbon. Doesn't mean anything. It's possible the parents who commissioned it, if he had parents and they commissioned this portrait for themselves, the lady might have said, I want this in a blue room. Okay, now we're going to do the frame. The painting is done. And I'm using balsa wood. And that little thing that I used as a measure is actually the same size as the painting. I actually tore the piece of canvas off of a mini painting and put it on a sheet of wood and then gessoed it and sanded it. And so I can use that as the basis of the opening of the painting, for the frame. Now I'm copying a frame that's from the time period, or it's not going to be an exact copy either, but it will be similar, and I'll show that to you soon. But I'm just going to cut this out first. And again, it's just balsa wood. It's 1/8 inch thick. I'm going to reposition this on there and make sure that I have it even on all sides. And I'll redraw the center just to make sure it's the right thing. And I'll sand this down so it's even as well. Yeah, that I eyeballed it. Seemed to work just fine. And I'm just eyeballing the decorative element. And just going around, I'm going to just adjust it as I look at it. Do a little measuring. Very little. Those are pieces that are going to get cut out. Now that I see it, I can see that it needs to be adjusted a little bit. I'll do the straight lines first. This will need to be sanded down. Okay. And now I'm going to cut out the center. Somebody was firing a gun in the background. We have a neighbor who has a pond that he put in, and he hunts ducks. But he practices all year round, so once in a while you'll hear a gun go off, but that's him. Okay, now I'm going to sand this a little bit. Just get some, this is just a rasp, diamond rasp. I'm just going to go around and smooth it out on all sides. Make sure there's no rough edges and ragged edges. Balsa wood is so soft that you get these ragged edges that they don't look very good. And when I'm done with this sanding, I'm going to take 1/16 inch square dowels and I'm going to cut them, and the whole outside and the whole inside is going to be covered with them. So you'll see, trimmed out. And that's going to straighten out any crooked lines. And I'm just going to glue those in place with super glue. And the reason why I'm using super glue for this is because it dries really fast, and it's easier to put a very fine line with the trim nozzle of the super glue rather than paint it on with wood glue. But you could use wood glue. You can use any glue you want. I'm not going to worry too much about any cracks in this because I will fill those with a little bit of wood filler and a mixture of wood glue later. And this is the gel, ultra gel super glue that I'm using. It is rather expensive, but it does the trick. Okay, and I'll just trim them off as I go. Now I'm going to do the whole outside. This does take a little bit of patience and time because there's little tiny pieces involved. And I'm just putting a very thin line of glue, and then I'm making sure that it's adjusted properly. You see why I wasn't incredibly concerned about some miscuts, because this is straightening it out. These little wooden dowels. That one didn't go on properly, so we're going to keep repositioning it. You have very little time, though, to reposition with this glue. Because it bonds so quickly. And just cut those tiny pieces. And I'm just using tweezers to put those on. And I'll sand these too as later. Make sure that they look solid. I'm going to skip over some of this because I think you get the idea. Okay, I'm getting close to finishing it. There it is. And those are all glued in. Now they need to be sanded, and there needs to be some wood filler put on. I'm just going to continue to sand a little bit more with some 600 grit paper, just to make sure it's flat. And I'll give it a couple of touch-ups here and there with the rasp. And now I'm going to mix up some wood glue and some wood filler. And I have Minwax wood filler, and then I'm going to put a little bit of wood weld, or weld wood, wood glue into it and mix it up, thin it out. And it will strengthen the wood filler as well. And we're going to just push it right into those cracks. I don't want any cracks to show, so I'm going to put a generous amount in and then brush it away with my finger, pushing it in, and just go all the way around, fill in anything that looks like it'll show up after it's painted. And this dries rather quickly. I want it to look like one continuous thread surrounding the frame. So I'm pushing in a good amount of this in there. I think it's about a third wood glue and 2/3 of the wood filler Minwax. But you could use any you wanted. You don't even have to use wood filler. You could use paper clay. And I'm just going to go around and sand it. It dries very quickly this way. And I'm just going to pull off the big chunks with my rasp. It's already dry. And now I'm going to paint the frame with two different colors. I have burnt sienna, and the other is, I think, a light burnt sienna. I think they're both burnt sienna, but one's by golden, and the other one is actually, I think it's apple barrel. It wasn't quite the color I wanted, so I'm first going to put this coat on. This is the undercoat. It's not going to be this color all the way around, but this is the undercoat that will show through a little bit. And this will dry pretty fast too, so. And it'll also help me to see if I have any cracks or missed anything. Go on the insides and out on the outsides. I'm going to eventually paint the whole back of it black, so I'm not going to take this burnt sienna around to the back. I'm just going to do all the sides. And even if I miss a little spot here and there, it really doesn't matter because I'll give it a couple of coats at first pass. And this is apple barrel paint, and it's flat, or matte paint rather. And it's a mixture of yellow ochre, a touch of black, and antique white. And it gives a sort of I don't know, a sandy green color, and it will dry flat or matte. House paint's usually called flat. When dealing with art paints, they're usually called matte. So, okay, that's the first coat, and I'll put another coat on. And you'll still see a little bit of that underpainting showing through, warming it up here and there. I'm just going around with the golden paint. It's just a little bit darker than the matte. And this is also not a matte finish. This is a satin finish. And I'm just going to take that all the way around. And this is still going to be an undercolor for gold. So there's an underpaint for the gold as well. And I'm going to trim this out in gold. Typically, when you would do gold leaf, you would put a burnt sienna or red background on it. And for silver, you would do maybe purple or a blue. But this isn't going to be gold leafed. It's actually just going to be chrome paint. And this is a chrome marker, and I'm just going to go around. And that's why I used a satin paint for this level, because the matte paint wouldn't work real well with this. So I'll give this a couple coats. I'll let it dry, and then I'll go over it again. I like these chrome markers. They work really well. Okay, you can see now where I'm going with this. And this is an inner frame, and it's being painted with matte black paint, but it's still wet. And this will go over the painting first, and then the painting goes behind this black frame, and then the whole frame will be put over it. But you'll see that later. And it's just a piece of wood that I cut out of the balsa wood. And now I'm going to put the design on. You see at the top where I put that bead? That's just a bead with a hook on it and a jump ring. And that's going to be what the painting is going to hang from. And now I'm going to just do a simple design around the whole thing. And I'm using Inktense pencils for this, which are water soluble, but they have very intense colors. And it tends to be a smoother lead, so that when you put it on a surface, and if you dab it with a little water, it acts like paint. So I'm just going to put a little floral design around the whole thing. And I'm basing this, as I've said, on an 18th century frame that I have gotten a picture of. But it's not going to be exactly like that frame either, but it'll be in the same spirit. So I'm going to go around and just mark where I need to put the flowers and the leaves. I'm going to use a couple of different colors. Doing this, I'm just making it up as I go along, actually. Just to give you a little close-up of what it looks like. And just to remind you, I have this speeded up quite a bit, so I don't paint or draw this fast. These things do take quite a bit of time to do. But there's a lot of joy in making things like this. And I'd encourage you to try to do an oil painting and try making frames like this. And some of you are really very accomplished artists anyway, and perhaps you haven't gone into oil painting yet. Some of you may be much better at this than I am. Okay, now I'm going to just put a little color into it. In fact, I know some of you are incredible miniature artists that watch my videos, and I certainly appreciate that in others. It's just a little dot of manganese blue. Can hardly see it, I guess, but and this is actually a very, very dark blue. I can't see what the color is, but it's just very dark blue. And I'm just gonna highlight some of the things that are a little light. Let's give a little more substance to the floral work. I know there's this idea that being competitive is not a good thing, but I view it as a good thing. I think it helps people to do the best they can and to improve. And so I have no issues at all with people being competitive and saying, well, I can do that better. I can do that. I think that's wonderful. And that's probably the teacher in me that hopes for that for others, that you see something like this done, and perhaps you just haven't had the idea to do it, and you do it, and you do it 10 times better. I think that's wonderful. So get in there and do it, and share your good work with everyone. Now I'm just adding a little more color just to bring out that blue ribbon that the guy has wrapped around him. Okay. See if you can see it. Yeah, it's not complicated. It's just very small. There's the inner frame, and that's dry now. And I'm going to put it together. The inner frame, they did this. This is done a lot in framing, where you put sometimes it's gold, sometimes it's white, sometimes it's black or other colors, just to highlight the painting a little more, separate it from the frame a bit. Now this painting isn't completely dry. You can see shiny spots on it, but I'm putting it together anyway because I don't want to wait 2 weeks and post this 2 weeks from now. So I'm putting it together, and I'll get the excess glue off of it, the paintbrush. And I just use fabric tack to put the picture together. And once this is completely put together, I'm going to paint the entire background, the entire back black, or actually I'm going to use brown, dark brown. And I'll just position that and glue that together. And again, I'm just using fabric tack glue. It's really a good all-purpose glue. I like this glue a lot. I use it for a lot of stuff. When this is completely dry, I'm going to spray the entire thing with Mr. Super Clear, and that will even out any shiny spots that might be there. I'm going to just add a couple of little dots here and there to the flowers, which I should have done earlier but forgot, and once I saw it, I thought, well, better do it now. Well, that's finished, and it hasn't been sprayed yet. And I'll give you a close look at the flowers and the frame and the bottom. That's a very simple floral design. This is the frame I based that on. You can see it's it's something like it. But that's my finished frame. And there he is. Portrait of a young man. All finished except for the final coat, which is a super clear finish that I'll put on. And it's actually a spray, and it's called Mr. Super Clear, but it will even out. There won't be shiny spots on it when I'm done. And it'll preserve that drawn-in floral pattern. There he is again. It was a fun project, and I'm going to be doing more paintings in the future. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you'll like and subscribe. It helps me out, keeps me motivated. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.